Welcome to my World History Notes, where I read from the book that I wrote to teach homeschoolers world history. A Bible believer looks at world history. You can find it on lulu.com, amazon.com, or at the Bible Baptist Bookstore, or just follow me here. And so I'm going to begin. We're still talking about the Reformation era. So Ulrich Zwingli was the leader of the Protestant Reformation in Switzerland and founder of the Swiss Reformed churches. Like many Protestant reformers, he believed in the confluence of church and state and used this power to mercilessly persecute and kill Anabaptist groups that resisted the power of the state as an enforcer of religious dogma. He also believed that man could annul God's covenant of grace for salvation by his behavior. He believed in a religion of faith and works. Eventually, he was killed in battle with Catholic forces in 1531. John Calvin was actually a French Protestant reformer whose French name was Jean Calvin. He was a child when Martin Luther posted his 95 Theses, but grew up to be one of the most influential religious leaders in history. Ruling his church state union from Geneva, Switzerland from 1536 to his death in 1564, with the exception of a period of about 3 years, he wrote a great many commentaries and opinions on the Bible and religion. His most famous work, The Institutes of the Christian Religion, are so important that his most noted enemy, Jacob Arminius, insisted that every Christian read and study them. Calvin took the writings and opinions of his mentor Augustine, the great Catholic thinker of the post Nicene period of Christianity, and took them as far as he could. He was a firm believer that before the world began, God didn't actually just foreknow who would receive his son, but he actually chose who would receive salvation, and only those people would be saved. The foundation of his philosophy is commonly represented by an acronym called TULIP, TULIP. T stands for total depravity of man, which is something that early Christians would have agreed with, as it is a foundational principle of the Bible and in direct contradiction to the humanism of the Renaissance. U stands for unconditional election, as in God chooses people unconditionally and not on the basis of their own merit. L stands for limited atonement, which says that Jesus only died for the elect whom God chose. I stands for irresistible grace, meaning that whom God chose to save, he will save. P stands for perseverance of the saints, in that those whom God has chosen will be saved, and even if they fall away for a time, they will return to the faith. Calvinism, as it is called, is the basis for the theology of the Reformation or Reformed theology. Although differing sharply with what early Christians believe in the various Anabaptists, that's rebaptizers, groups throughout history, this has been the basis for much of Protestant theology since then. One of the most important Calvinist authors of modern times was Arthur Pink, whose The Sovereignty of God is in many a church library. One of the most noted critics of Calvin of our time is Dr. Lawrence Vance, whose work, The Other Side of Calvinism, is remarkably thorough. Both books are available in many church libraries, and I definitely recommend both. But The Other Side of Calvinism is definitely explains everything. The best book I've ever written, or ever, excuse me, The Other Side of Calvinism is the best book I've ever read um, on this subject. And I think Dr. Lawrence Vance did a great service to Christianity. Calvin believed, in contradiction to the early church, that man had no free will and that man's lack of free will to choose God or not was a direct result of his fallen state. He quotes Chrysostom, John Chrysostom, to explain the error of the early Christians in Book 2, Chapter 2 of his Institutes, and says, quote, Chrysostom says, God, having placed good and evil in our power, has given us full freedom of choice. He does not keep back the unwilling, but embraces the willing, and then goes on to say that all the early church fathers were wrong, except for Augustine. Calvin was definitely an Augustinian in form and thought, and firmly believed that man has no free will with regard to choosing God or not. Institutes of the Christian religion, like Augustine's City of God, are must reads for Christians. I'm not debating here the merits or errors of any of the reformers, simply reporting what I found. Most of the Protestant churches of the Reformation believed in infant baptism, some form of Calvinism, and a state that would enforce the rules concerning both. Calvin, in particular, has been accused of having the Unitarian, that's a denier of the Trinity, Servetus, burnt at the stake, along with 24 witches. Next, we'll talk about some martyrs, and then we'll move on to Tyndale before we get to the King James Bible. All right, thank you very much for listening. I hope you'll come to your own conclusion when you're studying, and it's understandable this is going to be different from mine. I'm coming at this from a Bible believer's point of view. So if you're an atheist, Muslim, Hindu, Jew, other Protestant faiths, you won't agree with me. That's great, as long as you have your own opinion. Thank you. Talk to you again.